Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very special episode of Fossil Friday Chats. Today is the International Day of Women and Girls in Science. So we are here joined by some awesome women who rock, who are going to talk about their experiences as women in paleontology and their awesome work in paleontology as a field. Joining you, as always, I'm Brittany Stoneberg from the Western Science Center. Gabe is here, but he is at mission control, making sure we come to you smoothly and clearly, as he always does. And joining me are three Fossil Friday Chats alums. So if you haven't watched their episodes before, you can go ahead and watch that on YouTube. But everyone here has previously been on Fossil Friday Chats, and we are very excited to welcome everybody back to Fossil Friday Chats. How are you guys doing?
Doing so great.
Awesome. All right, let me go ahead and get some introductions through. We have paleontologist Jann Nassif, Mairin Balisi, and Ana Valenzuela Toro all joining us today. So how are you guys doing on this, at least in California, slightly warm Fossil Friday?
Yeah, it's a nice day, and thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, no, we are thankful for having all of you. And if anybody here has questions for our guests today, this is going to be a panel discussion. If you have a question, go ahead and put it in the chat. We will make an effort to go ahead and see if we can answer any. So I kind of want to start with just you guys introducing yourselves, talking about what you do, and maybe any updates you have since you were last on Fossil Friday Chat. So Anna, how about you take it away?
Sure. So, well, yeah, I'm a paleontologist from Chile, and I'm currently doing my PhD here in California, in Santa Cruz. So, my research is mostly focused in fossil marine mammals. So, I'm mostly interested in understanding the evolutionary history and ecological transitions of seals, first seals, lions. And since the last Fossil Friday chat, I think, I continue doing what I'm doing, my research in trying to understand the evolution of this group, but also I have been also getting involved in more diversity, equity, and inclusion issues in paleontology, and I really feel like that it's a great complement to my research, and I'm looking forward to continue doing that.
Awesome. Yeah, there was, if people are not familiar, there was a great Forbes article that came out about Anna's research. It was great to read about her work in climate change as a female paleontologist and about pinnipeds, because we love marine mammals on this show because they are great.
They are awesome.
Yeah, yes. Jann, how have you been doing?
Just trying to abstain from just going and checking out that Forbes article right now. I'm doing okay. So I guess, yeah, I'm still a PhD student at the University of Ohio. I am currently researching, basically looking at how sound is transferred through the ears of birds, reptiles, and trying to understand if that anatomy can be used to reconstruct the hearing apparatus in dinosaurs, as well as other extinct animals, specifically in reptiles, because there has been some work done with that on mammals before. And what the behavioral and ecological implications of that might be. I'm still here.
Still
it is
along.
just chugging or something or other. Yeah. It's not as nice here as it is in California, I'm sure, but at least I'm getting some natural sunlight today. Excited to be here.
Awesome. And Mairin, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. So let's see. What have I been up to? I think I was last on Fossil Friday Chats in August of 2020.
Oh my
right?
goodness.
So that was a
Gabe
while ago.
Gabe and I definitely had a little bit of a crisis when we realized, like, oh, we've been doing this for 2 years.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. It's been a long-running series at this point, and I'm very glad of that. It's very awesome to see what it's become.
For sure. Yeah, it's been a real joy to, have been one of the earlier presenters and then like see this formidable roster of amazing paleontologists who've come on this show since then. Let's see. So when I presented, I was at the Tar Pits. I was a postdoctoral research fellow funded by the National Science Foundation. Because of COVID, I still am doing that. COVID just, complicated some things, but made some things easier. And so my postdoc fellowship got extended at the Tar Pits, which is great. I also started a new position, which is I'm also a postdoc fellow at the University of California at Merced. And I will be starting a new position in July, which is I will be curator of the Alf Museum. So that's very exciting.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm kind of, you know, jigsaw puzzling like three jobs at the moment, trying to wrap up like current projects and start new projects and make sure that everything goes smoothly. Research wise, what I'm working on is so I'm probably most known for my work on large carnivorous mammals like the saber-toothed cat, dire wolf, and other, bone-cracking dogs, animals like that. But the more I study the big mammals, the big carnivores, the more I realized, well, a lot of them are now extinct, but we still have the smaller mammals, smaller mesocarnivores that are still alive today. And what's the story behind their survival, right? And so my postdoc work at the Tar Pits has most recently focused on these small to medium-sized mammalian carnivores and how they've responded to the loss of the large carnivores and also the large-scale environmental change that happened at the end of the last ice age. And a project that I've started recently as well is trying to extend this narrative into the present. So just, taking a very holistic view of biodiversity, right? Like modern biodiversity, its roots are in the past. And so definitely trying to operate from the viewpoint of, well, the past informs the present and may give us, guidelines for the future. So yeah, my focus generally is on mammals and specifically mammalian carnivores. But yeah, I like all animals, so definitely open to a lot of things.
Awesome. Well, I did want to extend my congratulations to you. Like I said, prior to going live, definitely we're gonna have you by at the Western Science Center and show you our intermuseum rivalry.
I would love that.
Yeah, so it's
Throw
great.
down.
Yeah. So it's great to see you guys and get these updates. Seems like so far the past couple months and in a couple of cases years since we've last seen you has been fruitful, professionally speaking. So to get us started with this conversation, in your previous Fossil Friday chats, you guys might have kind of talked about how you got into paleontology as a field, but I kind of want to touch on that. Like, how did you guys get into paleontology, and how has that how has getting into paleontology led you as either as a young person or even as an adult? Not everybody comes to paleontology when they're young. I didn't, and so I'm curious, like, how each of you came to paleontology as a field, what sort of challenges you might have experienced trying to get into the field, and how you kind of got to the place you are now.
Oof. I can start.
Yeah, that's perfect, Anna.
Yeah, so, well, I got into paleontology from biology. So since I was a child, I was super interested in nature, in science, in trying to understand how the natural world worked. So I got into biology when entering into college, and then when I was taking classes and everything, I took a class. I think it was a comparative anatomy, and that was the first approximation I had to paleontology. So at that time, I met a Brazilian paleontologist that was doing research in my country, in Chile. And she was the person who taught me everything to get me started into like research world, into like the science, into paleontology itself. And because in my country, we don't have a career or like a formal career as paleontologist, we don't have a degree. So I didn't know much paleontology. I mean, there were many paleontologists in Chile. So the way that I talk is getting into the Natural History Museum in Santiago. And I became a volunteer and continue getting in contact with other paleontologists from the museum, in the museum. And since then, I mean, I continue being a volunteer for 8 years, I believe, and I did my master. And then I decided to go further, and I came to the US to do my PhD in ecology and evolutionary biology, not only in paleontology, because I wanted to provide like a more ecological perspective and a wider perspective to my research in paleontology. And yeah, and that is the way that I got
Yeah,
involved.
that seems like a big theme between all of your guys' projects, is that really trying to take a more holistic view of paleontology and not have such a narrow focus, but really take paleontology and extrapolate it to other disciplines and even other time periods, which I think is really neat.
So yeah, I was gonna point out too that this is something that you and I have in common, Britt. That it sounds like the two of us entered paleontology as adults, and yeah. So same with Anna. I didn't grow up in the United States. I grew up in the Philippines, and yeah, I had a great science education, and but not so much paleontology, and part of my early science education, of course, came from my mom, who was a biology teacher at the high school level. And so it's fun, that I get to come to the ALF Museum soon because, yeah, mentoring high school students will be part of that position. Yeah, so that was my biology exposure, and as with Anna, I also entered paleontology from the biology aspect. And, there are bigger issues that might be at play here, why enter from the biology perspective rather than the geology perspective? And that might be, going into the theme of this session, that might be partly because of, well, stereotypes about geology, right? Oh, rocks, like girls, rocks, okay, things like that. Anyway,
Girls don't like rocks, or so they say.
Girls can't rock.
Yeah.
Girls just love crystals. That's all it is. Yeah. No rocks.
Jan, I do live in Los Angeles, so we have a bunch of those.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. So, but yeah. So again, I grew up in the Philippines, a very biodiverse country. So there was a lot of ecology already going on. This is a biodiversity hotspot, right? Like one of the world's hotspots for just a lot of different species in the same region. And yeah, so I definitely got a good biological perspective. But in terms of paleontology, it was like, I remember as a kid, I visited a cave site with my mom. But there wasn't, and this cave site, I learned as an adult, had fossils in it. But I didn't know that until I went to college in the United States and I started working with people who, I started being mentored by people. I went to college at UC Berkeley, and Berkeley has a good paleontology program. Yeah, so I started working with those grad students who were, who had this paleontological perspective that I lacked at the time. And so that was really great. That was how I came to do hands-on work in paleontology. Even though growing up, my most the best exposure I had to paleontology was National Geographic magazines that my grandpa in the U.S. would send us in the Philippines. So.
And how about you, Jan?
Well, mine is, I think, probably a little bit different. I was one of those kids who was into Paleontology when I was really little, and my journey was a little bit different, but not to get too much into that. But at the very least, like I grew up in Iowa, which a lot of people don't think about as being a particularly fossiliferous place. But the truth is, like, there's a lot of fossils from like the Ordovician, from the Silurian, like Carboniferous, like all these periods before, before the Mesozoic, before dinosaurs. Because it was covered in this massive shallow sea, and I just remember as a kid, my parents would just take me out basically to what it amounted to just kind of like a rocky field in the middle of nowhere. It was like 40 minutes from my house, and you could just find like, like crinoids and like little gastropods and stuff like that just on the ground, and it was absolutely wild to just go out there and just like pick up like seashells in the middle of the country for like an hour and a half before you get tired of being attacked by grasshoppers and then you go home. The grasshoppers were really bad. And then I just kind of forgot about it because I also came to it through biology. And so all the way through high school, for the first couple of years of college, I mean, really all the biological education that I got was focused for the most part on microbiology. And I did get a chance to take a little bit of marine biology and stuff. So I did get a little more hands-on in terms of like more macroscopic sorts of questions. And I think that was probably how I was able to hold on to it until I got to undergrad, and you're surrounded by med students or pre-med students, I guess, and they're all on this very specific trajectory. And even if you move beyond that trajectory, it's all it's all micro-focused. It's all hyper-atomized in terms of the kind of questions that you can ask and the implications of those questions, which I think is a good thing. But I really wanted to ask sort of some of these sort of higher order questions and actually explore at a level of the organism itself, or like the ecosystem, really try to understand like these what it interested me in the first place, rather than just work on trying to change the amino acid sequence of a specific protein and see if that change. No shame.
Yeah,
it's incredible. It's basically magic as far as I know. But like it's very impressive, but it wasn't for me. And then I got a job at a geology museum, and just started, giving tours and doing a little bit of work there, and really kind of fell back in love with it. Got to go into the field for a summer for a couple of weeks, and just like, got to actually see kind of the intersection of the landscape and natural history, and being able to sort of see that grand narrative play out. It was out in Wyoming. It was absolutely fantastic, and kind of got me excited about sort of those things that I had sort of ignored for a long time, just because, like it's not something that you get taught really within the standard education. Like geology, we didn't really get taught, so had to pick up some of that stuff as I went. But
so going off of that, of like how each of you came to paleontology, and I do notice something interesting that a lot of seems like a lot of us came through to the biology side, and we were talking earlier about how girls don't like rocks is this kind of assumption, and it seems to be a general assumption in geology that it's a much more opaque field for women to break into. Going off of that, noticing how so many people come through the biology side, how each of you got to paleontology in your own way, what sort of guidance or advice or just tips would you have for not just young women? Because like we said, like not everybody comes to paleontology as a child. There's always we always really want to focus on young children and getting them into science. But as an adult who came into this field, I think it's as equally important to focus on steering adults towards that field if that's something that they would like to engage in. What sort of guidance would you have for young women and adult women who are more interested in tackling these fields that might not traditionally be thought of as, fields where women are welcome?
Well, I have to start. I guess I would say that connecting with people and creating community is really important. At least it has been for me. So even like social networks, if you really use it in a meaningful way, can be really powerful for you to connect with this groups of paleontologists all over the world. So I guess for people that are interested in getting into paleontology, I will strongly suggest that to start looking for people in social media, trying to look at for names and trying to follow them, trying to ask questions to them. In general, people are really open to engage with just like if they are interested. So I think that is super, super valuable. And what else I will say, like, go to the museums. I mean, the museums are really centers of knowledge. So if you go there, you have questions, you are really interested, just ask the people there. They will take the time, they will answer to you. So probably they will be able to guide you to choose your own path to get into what you want.
Yeah, as someone who works at a museum, I'm always happy to answer questions. It is probably the most delightful part of my job when a little girl wants to ask me about dinosaurs. That's just great. It makes me really happy. And actually, as an aside to your social media bit, I think I've met all of you probably through social media first before we ever met at a conference or at Fossil Friday chats. That is how I know most of the people I know in paleontology from when I was starting out. It's how I know most of the women I know in paleontology. So that's a very salient point.
Yeah, absolutely. The questions, like the asking questions in the museum thing is real. Is I think something that is excellent to emphasize, just because I think that knowing that it is okay to ask questions and that you're not automatically being judged for not knowing something, or even if it seems very basic, that's totally okay. Obviously, like if people are working in a museum.
Oh no, we might have lost Jann. Well, hopefully we will get her back in a moment. So yeah, hopefully Jann's internet will right itself. Mairin, did you have any thoughts while we see if Jann's able to get back on the program?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so one thing that I think would be really valuable, and it might be valuable for us who are already in this discipline, is to emphasize that people can be paleontologists in many different ways. Like there are many different types of questions, there are many different types of approaches. I mean, in this group, it sounds like we've entered the field by way of biology, but there's also, like Anna was saying, oh, comparative anatomy, like, and at least for me, it was like, in the comparative anatomy classes, like pre-medical students tend to take that as a pathway into like, as a prereq for medical school, things like that. And it's like, but there are definitely comparative anatomy questions that can be addressed within paleontology. So yeah, just things like that, and just emphasizing that there are many, many ways to be a paleontologist. And I say this also as someone who, I was very shy about saying that I'm a paleontologist. I preferred to call myself an ecologist or evolutionary biologist, unless, if I'm feeling extroverted at a party, then I'm like, yeah, I'm a paleontologist, and then people are like, ah! Ah! Yeah, but like usually I am pretty reticent about it, and that's because I'm aware that there's a specific image of paleontologists that comes to mind for a lot of people. And then I guess I'm a paleontologist now because, given that I will be curator of a paleontology museum.
I think you qualify.
Yeah. By definition, that feels, even if not.
But yeah, just emphasizing different pathways and different research questions, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Welcome back, Jann.
Oh, sorry,
we
go
lost
ahead.
you for a moment.
Sorry
Go for
about
it.
that. Yeah, I'm sure that whatever I was going to say was already said by these guys. But no, but I absolutely agree about the different pathways and like the different angles. I think that, and that's sort of what I was going to say before the Skype apparently crashed on my computer. Basically, yeah, absolutely. I think that there is this sort of sense, especially in paleontology, because it is this field that is sort of seen as this sort of like kind of like kids zone for science, that there's this sort of sense that everything is settled and that everything has sort of become axiomatic, and that's really not true. And there's plenty of things that are sort of assumed or taken for granted within the field that are really open questions that can be examined from a number of different angles. Like, yeah, depending on what your background is, for sure. Like I came to it from an anatomy background, and so that's sort of where my questions led. But like it's all has to eventually be integrated because comparative anatomy is only as useful, really, in some instances, as knowing how old the specimens you're looking at actually are. And you really need a strong geology and chemistry background in order to actually sort of ask those kinds of questions. And so there's room for so many different people with so many different interests in the field. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Viewers know, like I've made no secret of the fact that my undergraduate degree is in English and my master's degree is in environmental studies. And at this point, I would absolutely call myself a paleontologist. And so there's also, and I don't regret I don't regret the path. Like I am very happy that those are the degrees I have. And so, yeah, you can be a paleontologist, but you can also be a paleo artist. You can be a science communicator. There are all sorts of pathways. And going off what you said, Mairin, a little bit earlier, it reminded me of something that happened to me once. I remember once being at an event and we were just talking to the public regarding showing off some fossils from our collections at the museum. And I just remember this wonderful lady. I could tell there was no malice behind it, but I remember when I had said, oh, yes, I work at the museum, I'm a paleontologist. She just looked at me, she's like, you don't look like one. Yeah, and we all kind of realize like what that means, but I think Mairin had a good point. There is this sort of assumption of what a paleontologist looks like. And as someone in the field, I've met, especially through this program, I've met a huge amount of like diverse people working in this field. So my image of a paleontologist is quite different. But, if you Google paleontologist, what's going to come up on Google Images? And so I'm curious how you guys like interact with that tension of knowing that the public's assumption of what a paleontologist looks like is probably not what you look like, and how to kind of combat that and just challenge that assumption. Like I said, the lady who said it to me did not seem like she was mean or like she had any ill intentions. I couldn't even quite blame her because that public idea of a paleontologist is so pervasive.
Yeah, same. I think, when I was younger and less experienced, I think I probably would have been offended by that. But now I'm just like, okay, we have a problem in the field and, we gotta resolve it because it's like, how can we get the public to understand, right? But yeah, I'm gonna think about resolving it over here. I'm gonna defer to Jann and
yeah, I mean, who knows if it can be resolved, if that's just going to be one of those things that, continues on. I'm hoping that we can change it, and in doing programs like this and in being open about the fact that we're paleontologists, this is literally what we're paid for, is something that can rectify it, one mind at a time.
Yeah, I agree. It's tricky, because to a certain extent, it's sort of, I hate to say this to it, but to a certain extent, it kind of feels like it doesn't matter in a lot of cases, just because it doesn't, like, my main fear in terms of, like, when you talk about things like representation and inclusivity when it comes to any field, I guess we're talking about paleontology, though, is it is really beneficial for people to be able to see themselves represented and be able to see that they have that it's not this closed off sort of walled institution that people assume it is. But at the same time, I don't personally really care if somebody who has no outside interest really doesn't see me as a paleontologist, because I guess from my perspective, I'm also used to people not seeing me as a woman, and it really at a certain point, I think that you kind of just have to go with it and just make all the adjustments that you can in the field on your own, but really hold sort of the power brokers within the field accountable for opening up that space and doing the hard work of actually exposing sort of the diversity of the field for what it is. Because I think there's only so much you can do as an individual, or even just like, within, it's one thing to put yourself out there, but it's another thing to actually have people understand that it should just be common practice to uplift people in this field rather than sort of relying on them to do it themselves. I don't know. Kind of have to just get everybody on the same page in the field, which will good luck with that. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am the same page. Yeah, with Jen, in terms of I really try to don't care about people think of me like as a Latin woman in paleontology, you know. So I understand that sometimes people think, oh, who is this little woman that is here? Why she's saying something? But I try to ignore them. I really try to don't change my behavior because of that. But I can recognize that that has consequences for people that want to get into paleontology, especially people that are younger, and they can really get influenced by this whole atmosphere of sexism or racism or etc. Right, or stereotypes in general. So I think just to put like a positive note to this conversation, I think what we are doing now is super powerful because exposing that we are women in paleontology and we look like very different, really it makes a point. I mean, it shows the people that they feel is changing, that everyone with different bodies, with different cultures, with different languages, and with different background really can work together and can be paleontologists wherever they are coming from. So I think having this platform and using it and it, speak out is really important, and I have seen a change in the last few years in how people it's reacting to this. It's not just because I recognize that in the past it were more like a curiosity. Oh, well, there are women in paleontology, but now it's like, oh yeah, I mean, of course they are, right? I mean, it's normal, of course. Why not?
Why
So
not? Yeah.
I think this is really positive, I think.
Yeah, and just the amount of effort that y'all have put into really making this a possibility and building this program really shows how like how challenging and it is to actually be able to provide this platform for people. You're sort of acting. I'm not saying you're acting on your own, but even so, like it's this you had to carve out a space for this, and I really appreciate that you are. Like it's fantastic. But like in terms of building those systems, like I can't remember if it was Anna or if it was Mairin talking about social media and sort of these entrenched media relationships that you see within paleontology being kind of a challenge unless you are actively seeking people out within either your own network or within your social media sphere to get past that. When you look at the number of paleontologists who are able to sort of exist as public intellectuals and go on the news or go on, give comments for a press release or go on National Geographic and talk about Tyrannosaurus Rex or whatever, or Spinosaurus or which one would die in a fight. But you have these really strong existing power relationships that are kind of difficult to break through, and so part of it, it's worth admitting. It is a challenge to sort of try to bring everything up to that point because there's always going to be sort of barrier there unless you can kind of break through that space and really show how how much is actually going on in the field beyond sort of these very established individuals and established institutions. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jen.
No, go ahead. I was just.
Oh yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I think that all of you make a great point about social media, and I think it really has democratized paleontology and a whole lot of other things as well. Yeah. So now people are visible in ways that they haven't been able to before, in ways that we haven't been able to before, and that's really great. So my experience has been I've been really lucky to have had wonderful women mentors for a lot of my time in paleontology, like my master's advisor, my PhD advisor, my 3 postdoc mentors, right? Let's see, yeah, and I at the moment I'm at the Library at Harpenden Museum. Our research and collection staff is mostly women, and and our parent museum is the Natural History Museum of LA County, which I believe has at least half of our curators are women. And so I've been really lucky to have been in these, relatively um, equal spaces, at least gender-wise. But it's like how, I can see that, but can the public see that, right?
Mm.
Like we live in Los Angeles. Why hasn't Hollywood caught up? Like, hello.
They've
So
got 6 numbers in their phone that they call every single time. Nice.
yeah. So, over the past few years, I've been really thankful to have been contacted by, like I know that there are many journalists now, or at least a good number of journalists who seem to recognize this issue of equity and equity in paleontology. And I hear from journalists who are like, "Hey, I found your name on this list or on this database." So I'm, for example, on the, let's see, which database was it? It's the diversity in EEB, like EEB being ecology and evolutionary biology. I think I'm on that one. But there's, a few others in different fields. So ecology and evolution has one, and geology, the geoscientists have one as well. And so, yeah, if you are a junior scholar, and would like to, get your name out there, yeah, I think that these databases are one way, because people are looking at these databases, right? Like journalists are looking at them, and yeah, so that's one relatively passive way, I think, to increase representation.
Yeah, I think going off of that, you guys all make a good point about how social media and community is pretty vital, I think, to making a career as a woman in paleontology, and not one, probably not feeling isolated, depending on where you work or or whatnot, and also just having people who have your back and who are willing to support you and cheer you on. Mairin, you mentioned that you have a lot of women mentors, which I think is, you know, great for people coming up into their graduate programs, coming up into their careers. And I think having a support system of other women in paleontology, or just other people who are willing to go to bat for you and say, hey, I heard this opportunity and I think you would be great for it. Or, hey, why don't you try out for this grant that I saw? There's something to be said for having like that support group around you and supporting other people in your field, and trying to make that effort.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I also think, and I think that it's important to keep in mind, even just within the field for ourselves, because I think that it's easy to fall into the patterns of behavior that have made people successful in the field in the past. And
yeah, it is a competitive. It is like, we can be real. It's a competitive field. There's there's not always a lot of jobs for all the people who want to be in the field, and so I think that can contribute to a general feeling of competitiveness, as you were saying.
Yeah, if everybody's had, like, historically, especially people who have, who are finally managed to get established in their careers, who feel like they've had to fight for their own survival because they haven't had access to those support networks and those professional relationships more broadly. And I think that it is important to keep that in mind. And, just because somebody is hypothetically, like if you have, in your network or people that, you think are going to support you, it's like, it doesn't necessarily always translate. And so I absolutely agree. That's just something really important to bring into the field, rather, as much as you can utilize it while you're there. Be feeling isolated is a big issue. I will say that. Just wanted to make note of that.
Also, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, no, I wanted to just add to that mentoring and connecting and building community is super important, because they also help you to navigate this hidden curricula that people are discovering in the way they are becoming scholars, or they are getting into not only paleontology but different disciplines. They are really hard to understand sometimes when you don't really have a background, a low background in academia in general or in science. So having being able to connect with other people that experience that and will, and I'm not saying they will take your hand and move with you, but they will guide you to have to face things, maybe discover like some hidden code that you didn't notice. And for example, in conferences and things like that, that for me, they were like, oh my goodness, what is happening? Why? I don't understand this human dynamics. But then talking to people that experience that, my mentors, I was able to understand that and navigate them as apparently in a successful way. So I think that it's really important to emphasize too.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, go for it, Jann.
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, no, absolutely, I agree. I agree with. I absolutely agree. You know, and I think it extends beyond scholarship in and of itself, and the whole sort of like the habits of mind is sort of like the procedures when somebody doesn't have a background in science. I think that that's really important to emphasize as well, because it's not just. I think like when we talk about things like trying to increase equity, trying to increase inclusivity, it has to extend beyond sort of these ideas of visibility and sort of just, you know, and positivity in that way, because it is just on its own, flat out of nothing. There's no reason that anybody is going on, you know, unless they do have a background in academia or they have family or friends or, you know, mentors that exist in that space, that they're going to know how to do any of these things, because because academia is such a different space, I think, than people would expect, just having understood, like, liked science through a certain amount of their lives, or been curious about that kind of thing throughout their lives. Like, I remember when I think I was a sophomore in undergrad, like, I went to my first, like, honors or whatever, like, upper level biology course, and, like, all the people in there are pre-meds. And the first question that I got asked, like, when I was like, meeting people first time, was, which lab are you in? I was like, what?
Like, I don't know what
I was like,
that
no.
means.
But yeah, I was like, I'm 20. I don't know what, like, I didn't even, like, who am I supposed to ask? Yeah, you know, it wasn't like, oh, are you in a lab? It's which lab are you in? And I think that that's something that if you don't have that baseline, you need that support to actually establish yourself and move past and, like, move over that barrier, you know. And it has to be maintained. It has to be assumed that people don't have this intuitive understanding of how things are supposed to work. It does require, you know, as much as nobody's going to hold your hand, like I said, like, it does require some active mentorship in a lot of cases, for sure.
I did not know until I got a couple years into my museum career. My boss told me, I think he was the one who told me, someone mentioned to me, like, oh, well, PhD students get paid. I was like, what? I had no idea. Absolutely no idea, like, that, you know, if you decided to go PhD, a lot of time, if you were in a good program for the most part, you would get paid a stipend. No idea.
No idea. And how would you know? Yeah. Never. Also, just big piece of, you ask for guides. Never accept a PhD unless it has guaranteed funding.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. Absolutely. I definitely, you know, through my old lab, my graduate lab, we have some undergrads in the lab, and through other undergrads I've mentored, that's definitely a piece of advice that I wish people talked about more, because, you know, unless you are independently wealthy, like, I think that you gotta worry about how you're going to feed yourself and have a roof over your head while you are doing a PhD or some other advanced degree. So yeah, absolutely. And that goes for, there are some funded master's programs as well. There's not many of them, but I think it's well worth the effort to find out. So I mean, since I have spent a lot of, you know, the past several years applying for this fellowship or that grant or whatever, funding has been front of mind for me for a while. And same with, you know, like, which fellowships do you apply for? What's the difference between a fellowship and a grant?
Yes.
Things like that. Yes, it's a conversation that I think people have not historically had a lot of, because academia generally has been, you know, not for people who are not independently wealthy already. And so,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. It's worth having those. It's absolutely important to talk about that basic fact of the wealth disparity in terms of actually succeeding in paleontology, or, you know, or in academia in general. Absolutely. Like, it is so difficult, and in some cases you could argue it's by design, to succeed through your early career as you exit undergrad, or, you know, get into grad school or postdoc, if you don't have a secure financial support system for yourself, or if you are with a partner, for your partner as well. And that ultimately is one of the biggest, I think, issues that keeps people out of academia, out of paleontology more broadly, outside of academia, is that it's such a high barrier to entry to try to maintain living on almost nothing for your 20s, potentially your entire 20s. I'm 29, unfortunately. But in order to get a shot at a marginally competitive position, and continue the research that you got into because you were genuinely curious and passionate about what you were exploring, because the university itself often enough doesn't really provide that much support, and the government more often than not really doesn't provide any sort of support to people in that position. And so it's difficult in some cases to encourage people to enter paleontology, knowing that you're potentially putting somebody in a very risky position in that way. If they aren't independently wealthy, or even the expectations of programs. I don't want to make this too much of a bummer. I feel like I'm making this a bummer.
No, don't worry about it, Jann.
Okay. Well,
it's completely valid.
Yeah, I mean, Oh, sorry. Yeah. No.
No, you're fine.
Okay, I don't want to take up too much air.
No,
but,
you're fine.
Because talking about things that become considerations that you would have no idea would actually be issues going into it. Things like providing health benefits and health insurance. In addition to just scraping by, just on more or less, what is often just minimum wage, or lower if you're a master's student. It is important to take those things into consideration. Also, if you are somebody who's in a position to be a mentor, it's important for you to know those issues as well and consider them with your students, because that is going to make their life, or your colleagues in general, because that makes their life so much more difficult if they have to navigate all that stuff on their own and have to deal with everything else on top of trying to develop a research career, if that's what they're interested in. I had to take off 2 months for medical leave, which as a grad student you're really not supposed to do, hypothetically, but you need as a mentor. I feel like I'm not yelling at my mentor. He's actually been really great about it. But I'm sure he's in there Larry high. But it is important to consider those things and to really, I think, address sort of those broader systemic barriers to success, because it doesn't look like anytime soon there's going to be any sort of systemic change that would eliminate any of that. So. Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, before we close, we do have a question from the audience for everyone. So let's go ahead. This is from Emily Adams. Thank you for watching, Emily. They say, I love that people of different backgrounds bring different perspectives that can add insights to research. What are some examples you've seen of new perspectives adding to paleontology?
That's a really interesting question.
So, I have an example from the tar pits. So, at the tar pits, we have our research and collections team comprises a few people, but with very diverse backgrounds, so academic backgrounds. So, for example, we have geologists, and we have people who specialize on, large mammals, like I do. And you have people who come from the anthropological perspective and from the geological perspective. Did I mention that? I think I mentioned it already. But also chemical perspective. So So we use a lot of chemicals in our work, and I mean like the tar pits as a whole, because yeah, for those who didn't see my Fossil Friday chat like over a year ago, so the tar pits is uh, it's a it's a fossil locality right in the middle of Los Angeles, where asphalt or tar seeps up from under the ground because of the because of the geologic history of this region generally. Don't want to into a deep dive right now. Um, and that asphalt seeps into the bones of mammals. So the asphalt, as it seeps up, it entraps a whole lot of different things, plants, animals, and it's been doing this over the last 50,000 years, if not more. And yeah, so basically the asphalt, once it entraps a mammal, and the mammal, becomes fossilized, the asphalt like gets into the bone, right? And what ends up happening is that your bone is still it's still bone, but it's just now been impregnated with asphalt. So there needs to be some chemistry to happen for that asphalt to be cleaned off of the bone. And yeah, so at the tar pits we have yeah, our preparators are really well versed in chemistry, and they are doing a bunch of studies to figure out like, okay, which of the available degreasers, etc., available today, what is good that might dissolve the asphalt while, for example, not so much degrading whatever DNA might be left. So we haven't had DNA here yet, but we are starting to realize the impact of maybe the historic solvents that we've been using. Maybe those have a hand in preservation of organic materials, things like that. So that's something that, like who would have thought that airplane degreaser and chemistry might be useful in paleontology? But that's the exact that's an example of yes, something where just a totally different perspective to an old problem um, might produce new and useful results.
It's really cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, all right. We're just coming up on 11 o'clock. So I just wanted to say thank you to all of our guests. Thank you for joining us and having this conversation with us. It was great to catch up with you and see you again after your last Fossil Friday chats. So if for each of you, if somebody would like to learn more about your work, follow up with you, where can they do that?
So for me, yeah. So if people is interested in connecting with me, I'm on Twitter. I think my Twitter account is a Valenzuela Toro as my full name. So yeah, I'm pretty active, and I'm always sharing information about Latin American paleontologies and also American paleontology. So it's kind of, yeah, let's connect. I'm super happy to chat with everyone.
For me, you can, I would suggest following the Tar Pits Instagram or Twitter, and also Alf Paleo, since I will be there as well, is also active on Instagram and Twitter.
Yeah, so I'm not super active on social media as much as I used to be.
Neither am
yeah,
I. That's okay.
I was gonna say, yeah, I know that you did a purge pretty recently. Yeah, but I do check it every once in a while, and I did get a notification if somebody shoots me a message. So I am on Twitter as JANUSSIF, Jann Nassif. And so contact me there, shoot me a DM, or if you want to go through the Whitmer Lab page, that's the lab that I'm in. They have like a Facebook presence, a Twitter presence. They have all sorts of stuff. Lots of great visualizations come out of there. Yeah, and if you are looking for a postdoc or a research assistant to do some digital preparation, shoot me an email or come to my DMs. I am very much academically single and ready to mingle. So I'm going to be shameless about it. I don't
Yeah,
even care.
no, you got to. Alrighty. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. As always, if you'd like to learn more stories from paleontology, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You can also find links to donate to either the ALF Museum and the Western Science Center to continue supporting programs like this. Thank you everybody and have a great Fossil Friday.